He did create himself. I think he stole from different areas and different people, but he was very much the same person at home that you saw on screen.
Jennifer Grant, the biological daughter of screen legend Cary Grant, had on many occasions personally witnessed moments she could never forget. She vividly remembered the image of her father sitting on the long bench in the backyard, gently running his hand through the hair of a young man before leaning down to kiss his forehead. She also could not forget that very night when she saw Cary Grant leaving the Bear Hotel at 3:00 in the morning together with another famous actor. His collar rumpled, his lips slightly swollen, as if he had just gone through a feverish passion. The following morning, he quietly stepped into his daughter's room, placed his heavy hand on her shoulder, and said, "Jennifer, what you saw, keep it to yourself, will you, dear?" And yet now Jennifer Grant has chosen to break that silence. She has decided to reveal everything. What could have compelled this daughter, after so many years, to go against the final promise she made to the father she deeply loved? And in the end, who exactly were those secret men? Everything will be revealed in today's video. In the emotional interview on CBS Sunday Morning at the beginning of 2024, when host Mo Rocha gently asked Jennifer, "After so many years, countless people have continued to wonder about your father's sexuality. Do you think it is finally time to tell the truth?" The entire studio fell into silence. Jennifer Grant lifted her head, and in that fleeting instant, her eyes seemed to hold back a storm. It was not anger. It was not shame. It was exhaustion. The weariness of someone who had lived far too long with a secret that should never have been a secret in the first place. Her reply came slowly, each word cutting like a blade through the velvet splendor of Hollywood. People keep mentioning Randolph Scott as if he were an exception. But the truth is, he was not alone. He was simply the only man my father ever dared to love in the light. From that moment, Jennifer had opened the Pandora's box that for decades the press, the studios, the sponsors, and even Cary Grant's closest friends had tried to keep locked. The first name to be mentioned was Randolph Scott. Everyone in the industry knew that name, but no one dared to call their relationship by what it truly was. They met for the first time in 1932 during the costume fitting for the film Hot Saturday on the Paramount lot in Hollywood. At that time, Cary Grant was just a young English newcomer barely finding his footing, while Randolph Scott was already a tall, handsome leading man with a perfectly cinematic face cherished by the studio. According to what Jennifer later recounted, Cary himself once said, "That day, everyone's eyes were on me, but I saw only him, and I knew the story of my life had just begun." Only a few weeks later, Cary moved in with Randolph at the mansion at 2177 Mandeville Canyon Road in Brentwood, a place that the press would later call the sanctuary of unusual friendships. For the next 12 years, they lived as if they were husband and wife, with cooking schedules, dividing the lawn work, raising dogs, and even hanging their pictures together in the living room. In 1935, a photographer from Photoplay magazine once sneaked into their garden. The photo was leaked, but Paramount quickly bought the rights for $1,200, a staggering sum at the time, to ensure it would never appear in print. Hollywood then had no social media, but there existed invisible eyes far more frightening than today's media. Journalist Hedda Hopper once hinted in her The Hopper World column, "There are two gentlemen living in a beautiful house in Santa Monica. They carry on exactly like a pair of newlyweds." That remark instantly became the subject of chatter at every cocktail party along Sunset Boulevard and stirred such waves of suspicion that Paramount was forced to intervene. In April 1944, Cary Grant received a telegram only 11 words long, sent from the executive office of Charles Bluedorn, one of the studio's senior directors. "End the relationship, or end the contract. Decide now." No signature, no explanation, but Cary understood. That night, he quietly packed his belongings without saying a single word to Randolph. At 3:00 in the morning, he left, placing only a handwritten note beneath the silver teapot. "You told me to live honestly, but no one will ever allow me to do that. Randolph Scott, the man all of Hollywood knew as the tough cowboy patriarchal figure, cried the entire night. The gardener later recalled in his memoir that Scott did not leave his room for 3 days straight. And just a week later, he announced his engagement to heiress Marion DuPont in a hasty marriage held in Charleston, South Carolina. No reporters, no grand wedding, no one able to force even a single smile. When Jennifer Grant turned 19, she once directly asked her father, "Did you truly love Uncle Randolph?" Cary did not answer right away. He silently opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box. Inside was an old photograph taken at home on Thanksgiving Day in 1936. Both men were wearing aprons, carving a turkey together. The picture had yellowed with time, and just beneath it was a handwritten line in black ink, "The days without surveillance." Jennifer recalled, "My father was never the kind of man who lived in nostalgia. Yet I never once saw him tear up that photograph, nor did I ever see him replace it with anyone else." Even in 1987, nearly a decade after Randolph Scott had passed away, Cary still regularly appeared at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale on January 3rd each year, carrying a single white carnation. No one knew about it except Paul Sanders, his personal driver, who later confirmed in a 2001 interview he never spoke the name of the person beneath the grave. But each time he would whisper the same words, "If that day you had not walked out of that house, perhaps today you would have lived a different life." Next came the story of Jerome Zerber, the celebrated photographer of Manhattan's high society. In 1937, while Hollywood was intoxicated with musical films, Cary Grant, who had just exploded into fame after the success of The Awful Truth, unexpectedly took a secret vacation in New York that lasted several weeks without informing anyone. Nobody knew exactly where he was until a reporter from the New York Evening Graphic discovered that Cary was regularly leaving the apartment building at 1 Lexington Avenue at 6:00 in the morning, the residence of fashion photographer Jerome Zerber. Jerome Zerber was not only the man behind some of the most valuable portraits of New York's elite, but also held the position of chief correspondent for the Society Snapshots column in Town and Country. He had power in his hands. Yet with Cary he never wrote a single word. The only time the name Mr. Drive G appeared was in his personal diary dated June 13, 1937. "We had dinner in the small kitchen. The lights were out. Only the record player played a sad jazz tune. I took no photographs at all because the most beautiful thing that night was real." For nearly 3 months, Jerome and Cary lived together in the small apartment. No one knew how long their relationship truly lasted because every trace photos, letters, notebooks disappeared after a shocking event at the end of that summer. A Paramount production assistant named Larry Wexler happened to see Cary kissing Jerome backstage during a promotional photo shoot for Look magazine. The very next day, the information was reported to the studio's head of publicity. And only 5 days later, Jerome Zerber was invited to the office of Robert Evans, who at that time was merely a young image manager hired to handle off-script issues, though he would later become a Hollywood legend with The Godfather. Jennifer recounted what her father had once confided. "He told me," his voice stripped of any emotion, "they handed Uncle Jerome a cream-colored envelope. Inside was a check worth $80,000 and a pledge of permanent silence. He said nothing, just nodded, then walked away. And from that moment on, my father never heard from him again." After 1937, Jerome Zerber virtually disappeared from Hollywood. He moved to Connecticut, later settled in Paris, and photographed only landscapes and still lifes. In a brief interview with Le Figaro in 1955, when asked about the stars he had once been close to, Zerber answered with only a single line: "Some people cannot stay, and some memories never want to leave." Thus, Jerome, the lover kept in the shadows, was also the one stripped of everything: fame, career, even his past, all because of a fleeting glance backstage. And what pained people even more was that Cary Grant never forgave himself. Jennifer recalled, "My father would often sit silently for hours in his study at night with no lights on. When I asked what he was thinking about, He simply shook his head and said, "I once had a place to love another person, but I never had a place to love myself." And then the story turned to Richard Blackwell, the fashion designer famous for his worst-dressed list, though few knew that he had once been one of Cary's brief lovers. In March 1949, on the night of the after-party following the awards ceremony at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the flashing lights of cameras went off endlessly, directed at dazzling names like Olivia de Havilland, Gregory Peck, or the explosive newcomer Rock Hudson. Amid that atmosphere, Richard Blackwell, only 25 at the time, was merely a young actor included in the special training list under the control of Universal's powerful agent, Henry Wilson. Richard had never had any truly remarkable role, but he possessed something that made every man in the industry wary, an unusual kind of beauty. Pale grey eyes that never looked down, and a whispering voice like poured honey. At that evening's banquet, Cary Grant noticed Richard the very moment he stepped into the hall. But everything truly began after the party when the two of them stepped into the elevator with no one else inside. In his shocking memoir, From Rags to Richard, he wrote, "Cary didn't say a word. He only looked at me with eyes unlike those of anyone who had ever looked at me before. And then he kissed me." Perhaps that story would have remained forever in the dark had it not been for a careless moment, a reporter from Hollywood Life Weekly. While following Henry Wilson, he accidentally caught sight of Richard leaving Cary's hotel room at 2000 the following morning. 2 days later, an anonymous blurb appeared in the Hiss and Tell column. A heartthrob, newly famous yet far too close with the boy the casting world calls Black Cat. That alone was enough. The studios buzzed with alarm. Henry Wilson was immediately summoned to Universal's executive office. But the first person to be dealt with was Richard himself. Jennifer Grant recounted, "I heard this story from Francis Nolan, my father's former secretary. She said that when my father read that column, he hurled his glass of liquor against the wall and spat out a line she never forgot. If this comes out, I won't just lose my career. I will lose my daughter too if one day she is born into a world that never forgives." That fury turned into action. Cary demanded an immediate end to all contact with Richard, ordered every letter destroyed, and even had people retrieve the behind-the-scenes photographs they had once taken together. Not only that, Cary's representatives, financed directly by Warner Brothers, sent an official warning letter to Blackwell. If the name Cary Grant was ever mentioned again, all contracts then under negotiation with Columbia and Paramount would be cancelled at once. Pushed out of Hollywood in silence, Richard left with nothing more than a single suitcase and a bitter lesson. Loving someone like Cary Grant, even if only for a single night, was enough to destroy an entire future. He turned to fashion design, and it was there that the name Mr. Blackwell was born, attached to the infamous 10 Worst-Dressed Stars of the Year list that terrified show business for the next 3 decades. But behind those mocked gowns and harsh critiques was still a heart that never truly healed. Jennifer vividly remembered a party in Malibu in 1952 when she was only 6 years old. She recalled, "I saw my father standing quietly in the corner of the yard dressed in a white suit, not smiling, not talking to anyone. His eyes followed a dark-haired man in black velvet. Later, I learned that was Richard. When he turned to leave, my father drained his glass of liquor and silently walked into the house. My mother asked, 'What happened?' And he only shook his head and replied, 'People only truly love you when they cannot stay.' That may have been the last time they saw each other, but the consequences lingered endlessly," Jennifer admitted. "That was the first time I ever saw my father take sleeping pills, the green ones shaped like little gems which he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Every time he thought of someone, he would take one, as if he were trying to forget even himself." And then the last one, the one who remained most deeply in Cary's memory, was also the very first man he ever loved. Orry-Kelly, the legendary costume designer who won 3 Academy Awards, and Cary's roommate when he was still unknown in New York in 1930. Jennifer recounted, "They rented a room so small it had only a single bed, and they had to sleep turned to the side so their heads wouldn't hit the wall. Each night, my father would tell stories in his English voice tinged with American, while Orry would laugh and mimic him in his thick Australian accent. They lived together for nearly 2 years, sharing boiled eggs for meals, unfinished books, and shattered dreams each time a casting rejection came. In his memoir, Women I've Undressed, published in Australia in 1965, Orry wrote, "Cary once told me, if one day I become famous, I will never forget you. But Hollywood will never allow anyone to keep such a promise." And that turned out to be true. When Paramount sent Cary his first invitation to audition in Los Angeles in 1931, he left. No goodbye, no letter, only an envelope hastily stuck beside the bed with a line that read, "If we meet again, let us pretend we never parted." 2 years later, Orry set foot in Hollywood. No longer Cary's bedmate, but a fully established costume designer. In 1942, he won his first Academy Award with An American in Paris. Orry sent Cary an invitation card to the celebration, not to flaunt his victory, but simply to see if Cary still kept the old promise. Cary did not come. But a few days later, Orry received a real leather envelope sent from the Chateau Marmont Hotel. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a small piece of paper with scrolled handwriting. "For the nights when you stayed, even when I didn't deserve it." Jennifer recalled, "I didn't learn about Mr. Praktfor Orry from my father, but by accident. My father had a wooden box hidden in the closet. One night after drinking, he fell into a dream. In his sleep, he called out, 'Orry, don't go.' The next morning, he sat silently for hours without eating, without speaking, just staring out the window. That was also the day I saw him open that box, take out a black and white photograph of 2 men standing side by side, their eyes fixed on a place no one knew where." In his memoir, Orry mentioned a detail the press had never uncovered. In 1947, when Cary took the role in The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, he called Orry at midnight, saying he wanted to meet. They sat together for 3 hours in a quiet bar on Sunset Boulevard. No one knew what they talked about, but the waiter that night, Manuel Ruiz, later told the Los Angeles Times in 1973. "The man named Cary cried. He cried and said, 'I don't know who I am anymore. Everyone only knows the face of me on the screen, and the one who truly knew me I have already lost.'" That same year, Orry suddenly withdrew from the film industry. He gave no explanation. He bought a small house in Palm Springs, lived in seclusion, and refused every offer of return, even from Warner Brothers when they invited him to design for My Fair Lady. Jennifer closed this part with a story tinged with a sigh. "My father never once spoke Orry's name aloud, but whenever I turned on the TV and someone mentioned Oscar, my father would quietly walk into another room. And I believe he wasn't avoiding the award itself. He was avoiding the memory of the man who made him believe in love from the time when he wasn't yet famous enough to have to hide it." And so the story moved into another chapter. For if her father had once loved men with all his heart, then the women who passed through his life were only like doors he tried to open, but in the end could never walk through. It was at this moment that a reporter asked, "So, did he marry only to hide his sexuality?" The question echoed through the studio, freezing the atmosphere for a few seconds. The lights shone directly on Jennifer Grant's face, the daughter once regarded as the darling of the most charming man in the world, which suddenly grew heavy with gravity. She did not evade, nor did she circle around. Jennifer looked straight at her questioner and answered slowly, as though each word she was about to speak had been lying in her chest for decades. "Yes, partly to survive, partly to live up to expectations, but that did not make him a liar. It only made him a victim of his time." Then she lowered her head. For speaking the truth was not to condemn her father, but to return to him the one thing he had been denied his entire life, the right to be himself. In the 1940s, 1950s, Hollywood not only controlled the public image of its stars, but also tightly managed their private lives. Cary Grant signed a 7-year contract with Paramount, which included a clause requiring him to maintain the standard masculine image, a phrase Jennifer later discovered in archived legal documents at her father's attorney's office. Newspapers like The Hollywood Reporter, Photoplay, and Life magazine all received large advertising accounts from the studios, and in return they stayed silent. And so he had to marry. He had to appear beside women. He had to construct an image that the public could admire without suspicion. But behind that glittering facade was a lonely man. One who had to rely on Milltown sleeping pills every night just to collapse into bed. One who would knock on a psychiatrist's door at midnight for fear of being exposed. Jennifer once recounted that she had seen her father sitting in the bathtub for more than 2 hours, motionless, simply to avoid the reporter's question. "Are you planning to marry again, Mr. Recount?" Mr. recounted. Grant. And so every woman who entered his life was never the ideal partner, but rather another door he tried to push open, even while knowing he never truly belonged on the other side. Virginia Cherrill, the actress from City Lights, was the first woman to walk down the aisle with Cary Grant in 1934. They married in London after only 3 months of a whirlwind romance. Yet that marriage collapsed in less than a year. Jennifer recalled her father's words. "I tried to love the way people expected me to, but the heart never listens to anyone." The Chicago Tribune wrote, "Grant returned to Hollywood while she remained in Europe. But few knew that on the night before their court appearance, Cary had drunk himself into a stupor, smashed the mirror in his Savoy hotel bedroom, his hand bleeding, but not a single newspaper reported it." In 1942, Cary entered his second marriage with Barbara Hutton, an heiress to the Woolworth fortune and, at the time, one of the richest women in the world. The press dubbed them the golden couple of Hollywood and Wall Street, while Time praised it as an alliance of beauty and wealth. But Jennifer said, "My father always felt as though he were playing a role, not truly living. He smiled at the right moment, spoke the right words, but in his eyes there was always an emptiness." After the divorce, Barbara left Cary a Beverly Hills mansion as a parting gift. Yet he never moved in. The house remained vacant for years until it was eventually sold to Rock Hudson. His third wife, Betsy Drake, was the only one who stood by Cary during the years when he wrestled with his identity. They married in 1949, explored meditation together, read Indian philosophy, and even experimented with LSD. Jennifer recalled, "LSD allowed my father to touch the parts of himself he had long denied, his true identity." Betsy did not object. She even documented Cary's psychological journey in her journals as a form of therapy. But Hollywood had no tolerance for it. An executive at Warner Brothers summoned Cary for a private meeting and bluntly warned, "If you mention LSD again, we will cancel the next 3 films on your contract." Ultimately, that marriage ended not from hatred, but from awakening. Cary could no longer continue playing the part of the perfect husband, and Betsy could not bear to watch him slowly die behind a mask. Then came his final marriage to Diane Cannon, the only woman to bear him a child, Jennifer. Her arrival gave Cary hope once more that he might live a normal life. But the truth remained, he could not. Jennifer said, "I was the most wonderful thing they had together. But my father never belonged to the shell that society forced upon him." Their marriage was a silent battle. Each tried, but the more they tried, the further apart they grew. In 1968, after signing the divorce papers, Diane quietly walked out of the Los Angeles courthouse. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times ran after her and asked, "Do you have anything to say about this marriage?" She only shook her head. But years later, in her memoir, she recounted an evening when Cary sat crying alone in the bathroom, his hands trembling, repeating over and over, "I want to be myself, but I don't know who that is." In that moment, she was no longer just the daughter of a silver screen legend, but the only one willing to name a truth Hollywood had suffocated for nearly a century. He never went public, Jennifer said, her voice soft like a sigh, yet sharp enough to pierce through the glossy veneer that had coated Cary Grant's life. But he lived honestly in the silences, in his eyes, in the fleeting touches no one else saw. In the nights when he sat alone on the balcony of a hotel, gazing out at the ocean, holding a cigarette he never lit, I once thought he was waiting for something. Now I know he was remembering someone. She recounted that in 1999, 3 years after her father's death, she finally dared to unlock the box he had left behind. Inside were hundreds of letters, unsent, with no addresses, marked only by dates. One was labeled Malibu, May 1959. Another, New York, the night before the Oscars, 1963. Some were scribbled hastily on hotel napkins. Some stretched across entire pages, yet ended with nothing more than a single line. "I wish we had been born in another time." Jennifer admitted there were times when she was angry with him. Angry at why he chose silence. Angry at why he hid himself so that every marriage ended in a dead end and every moment of real love was extinguished as if it had never existed. But eventually she began to understand. Not everyone is granted the privilege to live truthfully in a world obsessed with control. My father once told me, only once, when I was 16. That night we were at Claridge's Hotel in London. He sat at the foot of the bed, his head in his hands, sighing for a long time. Then he said, "My dear, love does not need to be proven. It only needs to be allowed to exist." That line to this day still makes Jennifer's throat tighten whenever she remembers it. Hollywood once called Cary Grant one of the most charming gentlemen in cinematic history. But for Jennifer, her father would always remain simply a lonely man. One who had traded freedom for stardom and then quietly lived his truth in the smallest of ways, unnoticed by the world. In 1981, the Los Angeles Times stirred controversy when it questioned Cary Grant's decision to turn down a $2 million offer to return to the screen simply to spend time with a close friend. Yet, the identity of that friend was never revealed. In an old diary Jennifer stumbled upon, Cary had once written a line that pierced the heart. "Sometimes I think, if only I could be myself just for one day. I would hold that person in my arms right in the middle of Times Square at noon, no matter who was watching." No one ever knew for certain who that person was. But Jennifer was certain of one thing. It was not a woman. And with everything that has gradually been revealed, from unsent letters to whispers in the middle of the night to the distant look in his eyes whenever he thought of a name from the past, there was no longer any doubt. Cary Grant was a gay man, and his love, though denied in the open, continued to live on, etched forever in the deepest shadows of memory. Hollywood once praised him as the most charming man in the world. But when Cary Grant passed away on November 29, 1986, at the age of 82, the long line of mourners outside the Adler Theater in Davenport, Iowa, was not there only to bid farewell to a screen legend. They came to look one last time at a man who carried within him a secret that until his final breath no one dared to name. Variety wrote, "Cary Grant is gone, taking with him an era and taking with him truths Hollywood may never hear spoken aloud." That, too, was the legacy he left behind. A question without an answer. In terms of wealth, Cary left an estate worth more than $60 million, most of it entrusted to Jennifer and to several charitable organizations supporting arts education. But if one looks only at numbers, one misses the deepest part of his legacy. Cary Grant left behind the courage to live with pain and a mirror for Hollywood to confront itself in, even if in the past it had chosen to look away. In her 2011 memoir, Good Stuff, Jennifer revealed, "My father once said, 'They remember the films, but they forget the man.' And he accepted that. And so for decades, Cary Grant chose to let his true self live only in letters that were never sent, in private notes, and in the quiet glances he gave to those whose faces the press never managed to capture. Once he attended the Governor's Awards in 1981, sitting in the third row, the host spoke of his legendary career. Yet not a word was mentioned about his quiet contributions behind the scenes. Cary was the primary donor for a film scholarship program for LGBTQ+ students at UCLA under a false name. Jennifer only discovered this after his death, when she received a letter of gratitude from a young student who wrote, "I don't know who you are, but thank you because you gave me the chance to learn how to tell my own story." In a safe at his Beverly Hills home, alongside property deeds and old scripts, there was an unfinished draft, not for a film, but for a play titled The Other Man. It told the story of a famous actor living in a society that would not allow him to love the person he truly loved. No one knows why Cary never revealed the script, but later researchers, including biographer Mark Elliott, believed that was his spiritual will. Jennifer herself once said, "If I had to summarize my father's legacy in a single sentence, it would be, he lived his whole life protecting his secret, and he left this world so others would not have to do the same." Today, as Hollywood becomes more open, Cary is remembered not only as a style icon and a flawless star, but also as a man of courage, for he chose to live truthfully in silence. A man who once used stardom to conceal his true heart, but who also used that very heart to plant hope for the generations to come. All the names that have surfaced, Randolph Scott, Jerome Zerbe, Richard Blackwell, Orry-Kelly, were not just fragments of a secret love life. They were vivid proof of a truth Hollywood worked for decades to conceal. Not because Cary was weak, but because he lived in an era when bravery could exist only in the eyes, in letters never mailed, and in embraces that had no witnesses. Jennifer Grant has spoken on behalf of her father, but the question remains, how many others like him still lie buried under the dazzling lights, carrying secrets that no one dares to name? If this story made you think, leave a comment below. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next hidden truth from Hollywood.